So good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everyone. My name is Zeynep Gambetti. I'm pleased to welcome you to this event, which is jointly organized by the Emergencies of Authoritarianism project of the International Consortium of Critical Theory Programs, by the April Institute, and by CRITUP, the Critical Theory Under Pressure Network. Today's panel brings together scholars and activists from different authoritarian/fascist contexts into conversation to shed light on a question many of us are unfortunately asking across the globe today: how to live in authoritarian times. And instead of an academic exchange, we seek to explore how authoritarianism deeply affects the everyday life, how it changes our daily routines and ways of life, the way we relate to each other and behave, and also what impact it has on our affective responses or states of mind. And so the idea is to share our respective experiences, personal experiences, to learn from each other, to realize how we might be going through similar pressures, fighting similar monsters, and also be inspired by each other's coping strategies or struggles. So without further ado, allow me to present our speakers to you. Rahul Bhatia is the author of The New India, a book about the role technology and nationalism has played in democracy's retreat. He is a Harvard Radcliffe Fellow and has won the True Story Award. Volkan Çidam received his PhD in philosophy from the Goethe Institute in Frankfurt. He worked as an assistant professor of political science and international relations at Boğaziçi University, where I taught also for some time. Until recently, when his contract has not been renewed following the political takeover of the university by the present administration. As a political theorist, his research lies at the intersection of democratic theory, German idealism, the social and political thought of Marx, and critical theory. Dele Dittrich Frydetzki is a researcher and performance artist. They currently work on a PhD on non-consensual modes of communication in rehearsal processes based on the work of intimacy coordination at the Berlin University of the Arts. Simultaneously, Mike is active in connecting and supporting queer struggles in East Germany. Joseph Howley, I hope he does join us, is associate professor in the Department of Classics at Columbia University and currently a fellow at the Institute for Ideas and Imagination in Paris. Beginning in 2023, oh, there he is. Very
I'm
nice
so
to
sorry
see
about
you.
that.
No problem. You just arrived when I was presenting you. So beginning in 2023, he was active in organizing faculty and staff at Columbia against the authoritarian assault on higher education and the weaponization of anti-Semitism charges to suppress free speech and advance far-right politics in the US. So thank you all for accepting to share your thoughts and experiences with us today. It's really precious. I hope that we will be coming up with certain threads. We will be realizing that there are certain patterns that are being repeated, but also unique experiences that we might have to bear in mind because, unfortunately, we are all on the same boat, it seems, now. And so I would like to ask my first question, and if it's all right with you, let's do the sort of order in which we answer could be alphabetical. So Rahul, you might like to begin, and then Volkan, and then Mike, and lastly Joe, and then we do the next round. So the first question is very simple. How is life under authoritarian conditions for you? meaning life at the everyday level, right? Your personal experiences of acting under conditions of uncertainty, risk, the tensions you might have between resignation, motivation. So please, Rahul, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me over. When we think about authoritarianism, when people talk about it, and we ask ourselves such questions, what is life like? It seems to have a really definite structure, at least at first thought. It seems like it requires us to sort of explain life under authoritarianism as a series of actions and emotions and other such things. But in my experience, I think, especially over the last 10, 12 years in India, and for longer than that, it's just something that rears its head every now and then. And before you know it, it's actually a part of your day-to-day life because your own behaviors have changed. You've become more cautious, at least in my case, which is, I am an investigative journalist and a writer. And over a period of time, for me personally, what's become hard, and this is, I will start with the professional aspect because my profession is a really huge part of my identity. As as a writer, as somebody who's always wanted to explore India and society in general, I think my work, I have always considered it the same way, which is I'm going out to understand my country. I'm going out to understand why people do the things they do. But the reaction to the work that I do and the reaction to the work that a lot of journalists do has often been, well, you're focusing on the negative, or please be careful. Because times have changed, society has changed all around you. And you are seen as somebody who is perpetually negative, who is unable to see the positive side of life. And you often wonder whether you're suddenly occupying this strange land, this reality, which nobody else seems to share with you. It's not something that you can have a conversation about, a straightforward conversation about with the people around you, because they see the world around you so differently. You become aware, at least I've become aware very much of this lack of critical thought around me, people refusing to sort of question what's going on around them. And I think I think it has an effect on you after a while. You don't know it, but it's this very slow, corrosive effect that it has, and it shows up in your writing, it shows up in your interactions with people. You start questioning yourself, should I say something or should I not? There is that sort of chilling of speech within you. And you may sort of put it down to being more conservative or being older and wiser and all such things, but you feel a certain kind of dimming within you. But I was thinking about this question, I think, and one of the things that occurred to me was when I look back at the last 10, 12 years, I have a distinct sense that I have lost time. Like it feels like all those things that I worked towards as a young writer, um, somehow in the middle of the last decade, all those assumptions were upturned, and I had to learn a whole new way of looking at life. Also, my own view of things actually narrowed, where I was interested in many, many things earlier. Politics, I think, especially authoritarian politics, tend to sort of focus your mind on that one issue where all you can see is politics, because to look at anything else apart from that feels irresponsible. So there is a certain kind of absence of joy, and you realize it much later. And with that, I'll stop for now.
That was incredible. Thank you. I'm seeing heads, us nodding, so similar patterns across, right? Volkan, do you want to continue?
Sure, sure. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for having me, and thank you for organizing this extremely important event. I must apologize in advance if I seem somewhat unwell, and I am unwell, as you can hear my voice. I probably have the new variant of the COVID-19 virus, and as you all know, the struggle against the pandemic has been and constitutes to be a fight against the ignorance spread by right-wing populist authoritarianisms as well, right? So in Turkey, we do not have the medication necessary to treat the new variant because the government doesn't acknowledge or doesn't believe in the reality of COVID-19. So let me therefore begin by reiterating that right-wing authoritarianism is lethal, as we all know. It is an attack on the basic rights of individuals, which any legal order has a duty to protect, most fundamentally, the right to life. When I thought about the question that you asked, Zeynep, I thought about when it began and when did authoritarianism began? And of course, there are, I mean, scholars are writing about and writing about authoritarianization in Turkey and giving certain dates, which are, I mean, you can say like the show trials of 2000s, late 2000s, or they go back to referendum of 2011, and some point right to the Gezi uprising and government's unlawful and violent response to it, right? For all these days, we have reasons to count. But I mean, I think for us all, there is a beginning, a subjective beginning for all this authoritization. And for me, it was a traumatic event that marks the beginning of a realization of the new situation we find ourselves. For me, that day was 10th of October. The Kurdish opposition party HDP called for a protest action in Ankara, and the security forces allowed a jihadist to explode himself and killed many protesters. About more than 100 people have been died on that day. And I don't know why I begin with that day, because prior to that explosion or jihadist attack, there was this surge attack which has been employed to the students in southern part of the Turkey. So maybe because the October attack was the second of its kind, and not only that, we have watched it live, but because the government officials presented themselves smiling and happy on their first TV appearance, right? I can't just forget that day. I know this was a traumatic experience for myself because I remember running back to my wife to inform her and said, something terrible has happened. And don't ask me what, but something terrible has happened. And she was like, she began to cry. And then I don't remember the rest of the day because then my wife made me remember that we went to protest in Taksim. We went to solidarity protest in Taksim after the event, but I don't remember that, right? So that's the experience that initiates authoritarianism for me in Turkey. And I think authoritarianism, and that's similar to what you said, Rahul. I think it destroys the sensation of time because we live it maybe in terms of shocks, right? So we live it through traumatic events, and it's almost impossible to overcome that trauma. And then the next event happens, and then you have again traumatized. So authoritarianism, I think, is when I say authoritarianism, it's about dealing with traumas, dealing with the impossibility of having a real experience because we remember certain dates. I think I'll stop here and then we can continue later on.
Thank you so much. I mean, the time of traumatic events was an important point that might come up again in our conversations. So, Mike, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for having me too, and also for Rahul and Volkan's contributions already. I found myself nodding a lot, so this reverberates what you were saying. And I'm very pleased to welcome the cat also. It's a very soothing presence. Thank you for sharing. the cat with us. I felt the need to maybe position myself or relate to what's the background from which I'm speaking. I'm a person that has been born in 1990 in the eastern part of Germany. I'm a white person, I'm a queer person, I'm reading myself as non-binary, and I'm living between the bigger cities and the smaller cities in this post-socialist era, or like land, more or less. And I feel that my relation to living under authoritarian times very much relates to this specific context, because I find myself thinking that for me that's actually it doesn't feel new. Maybe the quality of authoritarianism worldwide feels new, but for me, growing up, what was important was the heritage actually of the post-socialist era of the GDR, of what all of this left in the bodies of my family parts and also in the systems that I was brought up and educated in. For instance, we went to kindergarten and had still figures of authority from GDR that were still bringing up the children of the 90s. And of course, we were confronted with the surge of right-wing violence that was very unleashed at the time towards migrants and also queer people or people who considered themselves punk, etc. So there was a lot of violence around and a lot of heritage of former or we believed maybe former forms of authority, but that are reconfiguring right now, because I'm here invited today as associate of the CSD Bautzen, so the Christopher Street Day Bautzen, which is a small queer pride in the countryside that faces huge counterattacks, like violent attacks on the participants because of their queerness, because of their otherness, by neo-Nazi organizations, hugely backed by the right-wing parties or right extremist parties of Germany or in Germany. So what does that mean for me, I wonder? I can say this meant a lot of depression, and this meant for most of my life a lot of hypervigilance also. I found myself being very, very well, equipped with all the strategies of hiding, of, not being tangible. But for the last years, I realized a shift in my strategies. I can actually proudly announce that I applied for the German state to change my gender on my passport. And we have this law already since more or less 1 year. And I was always the person saying, no, this is much too dangerous. You will find your name on a list and they will take you, they will kind of get you the first day when they take over power. And I realized that either I have the choice to continue this way of hypervigilance and also trying to eradicate my existence. And I wondered that, or I realized this dim feeling that Rahul, you were also speaking about, and that was a lot like speaking to me. I realized that I just can't. I was realizing, no, it's not up to me to to hand me a female, in my case maybe female passport, and not acknowledging the gender that I'm experiencing. It's up to fucking them. So why not taking my rights, using them, exerting them as long as I can, also for others to see and for others to connect to, and then they shall come. So I'm finding some courage these days. That's probably the thing that I want to share. And I'm very aware of the fact that in Germany this is still possible. I went to the US this year and was trembling at the border, for this question of, okay, like, is already a haircut something that will, trigger attention, what's on my socials, etc., etc. So I'm completely getting everyone's choice to not doing these steps, to hiding, to, like, and also, yeah, there's a lot of privilege also in choosing that. I'm very aware. But yeah, I wonder if I would have found these very clear moments of courage also, if not, threatened in this way. But I can only feel that because I'm in community, and this community, as more there's pressure, the more I'm also feeling alliances that I wasn't aware of before. So this depressed feeling of loneliness is also kind of vanishing a bit, because yeah, I can't afford that also anymore. I need to be in connection, and I feel that this is also happening right now much more. That's all from my side.
Thank you so much, Mike. I mean, 2 points that I gathered from what you just talked about was the reconfiguration of past forms of authoritarianism, which is super interesting, how they actually change shape from the socialist era to the right-wing xenophobic racist era. But also your account of courage and sort of connectivity, which I think will link to our second question: how do we find the courage, right, to cope with all this? Yes, so thank you. So Joe, would you like to have a go?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks to everyone who's spoken already. A lot of that really resonated for me. I mean, I also feel I should situate myself a little bit. I'm an American academic, as Zeynep said in the introduction, and I think a lot of the people I call friends and organize with in the States would want to point out that the things that we are experiencing as an authoritarian sort of push or surge in the United States are in many ways things that have already been present and experienced for many groups in the United States, and what we're seeing now is a kind of eruption of them into the open. I mean, I've had this mental image often of a kind of like a rotting log. Like once the mushrooms bloom on the outside of it, like the fungus has been growing inside it for a long time. And so the things that I'm experiencing now, and that I'll speak to here, are things that I know other people have dealt with for decades. In many cases. I've been thinking about this sentence that one started seeing on social media sometime in the last decade. I associated it with wildfire, the rise in wildfire smoke in North America that was suddenly all of us like a very prominent feature of lives, seemingly sort of unpredictably. And I haven't been able to track down the source of this sentence, but someone said, and then many people passed around, climate change will manifest as a series of disasters viewed through phones with footage that gets closer and closer to where you live until you're the one filming it. And I think that there's two things that I would say about my experience of authoritarianism and the United States right now. One is that it is still for me personally very much focalized through institutions. And I should just say a little bit about this, like, this current era of crisis in this country, you could identify its starting point various places. But the acute crisis I think we are in right now, I really do identify with the days and months after October 7th, 2023, and the very swift attempt to start suppressing campus protests against Israel's war in Gaza. So a lot of Americans, I think, will talk about this as a Trump phenomenon. But it's just very clear to me that many of the strategies that were being deployed to suppress Palestine solidarity were test runs or sort of paradigmatic for what we would get when Trump took office. And that's certainly how I've experienced it. And so what that means is that, the effect, what has it been like for me? It has been profoundly destabilizing in many ways, but not least because I'm an academic. My whole life is focalized through a university, and I had been previously under the impression, not that universities were like morally good necessarily, but that they were one of the tent poles of a democratic society, and that I had the privilege of being in one of the most kind of democratic and liberal contexts in my society. And what I've experienced over the last 2 years is that the people who really run universities like mine were very eager to hand those democratic institutions over to authoritarianism in exchange for the suppression of Palestine solidarity. And so to lose that sense of being able to trust, not again, not in the kind of moral virtue, but just in the sort of basic democratic commitments of academic institutions, profoundly destabilizing for someone who had thought of myself as a career academic. The other thing to say about it is that I work with colleagues at many other institutions, and we are all at different points on the waterline, which is to say, like, um, some of us are at places where the water has already covered our heads. And since some of us are at places where it still seems like a distant threat. And it is very hard to coordinate colleagues. Like I'm involved in a scholarly organization that has members at lots of different universities and colleges, but is based at a university that has been really under attack by the Trump administration. And it's been very hard to help everyone get to a place where everyone sees the nature of the threat and everyone has the same kind of risk calculus and sense of how safe we are. In part because, yeah, some of us have already been through it and some of us are in it. And some of us have managed to avoid thinking about it. And, as an academic, I mean, my work, my scholarship does not incline me to direct, tension with the regime. It's my activism, which is very new to me just in the last 2 years. Um, so there was always the option for me to just try to close the door and go back to my philological scholarship, right? And I have many colleagues for whom that is their entire habitus as an academic, is I'll just sit here and do my research. But as Rahul said, it becomes all consuming. One really feels like one can't not think about it. So anyway, I hope that's made sense. I mean, it's and I also, realize it may sound a little naive. But I have, having become aware that my basic assumptions and calculus about where my institution sat in the order of things was wrong, has been truly disorienting and destabilizing for someone whose work has been focalized entirely through these institutions.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's very important what you're saying. So it's not just a loss of time, or we're sort of rethinking or re-experiencing time, but also space and perhaps the ground on which we move and think, or things we were attached to or believed in are sort of rotting, as you say. Okay, this leads us into the second question, which concerns coping mechanisms. So what are your coping mechanisms? What are the everyday tactics or even collective strategies? Because some of these are coming up now in our conversation. Collective strategies of resistance or not feeling alone that have emerged from your experiences in living in totalitarian or authoritarian times. So if you can, share at least one thing that has helped you survive or connect to others, that has made you grow, change in a better way, could you share that with us? So starting with Rahul again.
So I think one of the things that I've been lucky to sort of have is a profession that allows me to talk to people extensively. And one can say that India has been on a somewhat authoritarian trajectory for the last 11 or 12 years. I think it goes back even further, but openly. And of those 11, 12 years, I've actually spent 7 or 8 years working on a book about my country's authoritarian turn. And during that time, I just went out and spoke to hundreds of people. And the stories that I found myself gravitating towards were those of people who had an ideal in their minds of what this country could be and what they were fighting for. And I realized it took me only 8 years to figure this out, that I was writing about people because I wanted hope myself. And I wanted to know how people were dealing with these things. And I spent a lot of time with them, and came away thinking that yes, what they're doing is right. They're engaging with the system in legal, lawful ways. They are going to the judiciary. They are activists. They're spending time on the ground, convincing people, building consensus, building networks of solidarity. And what I found also in this time, and it's connected to this larger question of how one copes with authoritarianism, because what I saw was that these people did not know of each other's existence. They didn't know of each other's existence because I think over a period of time, when you live in a society that is by some measure authoritarian, you tend not to sort of get news of other people. You are living in your own reality because one of the first things that happens is your that sense of a shared reality is broken. That disconnect does happen between you and your larger society. And so for me, that coping mechanism has actually been to put people in touch with each other. And when I'm having talks or conversations, I make sure I bring people together. For myself, I think just having that dialogue with people, just reminding each other that there is a better country that you want, that there are better options, um, reassessing your own networks of solidarity, because those old places that you thought would support you, it turns out that they're not of much help over here. And so you need to create those new ecosystems for yourself. Apart from that, I just read and write a lot, and I disengage with the news when it gets a little too much. I've allowed myself to do that now, um, just because it comes from this realization that the roots of authoritarianism are deep and they predate a political administration or a politician. The conditions were there, they were ripe. The right person just happened to come along and take advantage of these things. And so for me, the epiphany really was at one point when I was doing my research, it was this, that there is another group of people, authoritarians, who have an idea of this country or what kind of country they want to make. And they worked at it for a very, very long time. In India's case, it's been, for over a century, I think now. And it strangely brought me a lot of comfort because I knew that whatever change I wanted would perhaps not happen in my lifetime. And that kind of calms you down because you then tend to look at everything through this prism of history and your place in it. And I just told myself that I'll just do whatever I can, which is write, read, communicate, and, whatever will happen, will happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So precious, the connections, the new ecosystems that we're sort of obliged to create, but perhaps they are what will enable the hope to stay on, right? That those are the new havens for hope, perhaps. Thank you for that. So Volkan, do you want to continue?
Yeah, thank you, Zeynep. The last words that you use, Rahul, whatever happens, happens. I think that's some kind of comforting. I mean, that's experience at least, because like living under continuous emergency conditions has this kind of an effect. You know that the government can get you if it's determined to do so. So I mean that doesn't mean that you have to act reckless. Of course, you act and do not say bad things about the president because it will be the most the dangerous thing in Turkey to do, right? But I mean, yeah, you just do your thing because you are convinced already that when they want to get you, they're going to get you. So that gives kind of an relaxation, emancipatory point of view, I would say. Well, I mean, and for the coping mechanisms, it wouldn't be very surprising to say for me as well that being organized in political struggles helped me a lot in the last 10 years. I mean, I can count two of them. One of them was the peace petition, Academic for Peace, Academics for Peace. I mean, that was a peace petition that we signed in 2016, which called on the government to stop bombarding Kurdish cities in the east and to ensure the safety of the Kurdish citizens living there. And the fact that, unlike, yeah, I mean, that was the one struggle. I mean, the fact that they did not was to the liking of the government. They have sued us, all of us. It was like I don't know, 1,000 academics, Zeynep, more than 1,000 academics. And I was actually, I was in my university privileged, which turned into a curse later on, because in our university, the democratically backed rectorate, the presidency, backed with us. I mean, stood with us academics. So we were in a more or less privileged position. But there, I mean, around the struggle, during the academics during the court sessions, court meetings, and preparations, we got to know other academics from other universities, which we would have probably not get to know, right? So there emerged solidarity academics, and there, I mean, it was not an easy time, by the way. I mean, we all had different positions, so it was like a political debate always. Like, are you going to go for this? I don't know. Are we going to go for this punishment? I mean, are we going to ask the court to stop suing us or not, etc.? I mean, these kinds of conflicts there were, but it helped to discuss them. So it was a kind of coping mechanism. Another struggle in which I was in was the defense of our university, because in 2021, a rector who is a totally outsider appointed into our university, and academics and students immediately came together, and we were against this rector, and we started the longest resistance against appointee rectorate in the history of Turkey, I would say. And that could come up because we could meet together with the academics and students. We'd meet together each week and write a bulletin, for example, about what we have done, what happened in this university, so on and so on. So through this organization as well, I got to know many people whom I wouldn't know. I mean, I wouldn't know anyone. I wouldn't know anything about being a social scientist, anything about a chemical engineer, for example, right? I mean, why would I have any social relation with that person? But it happens that, I mean, we can get together in these struggles. Well, so protests, if you can't do anything, protest actions help. But from time to time, I just want to say this as well. From time to time, it's also necessary to go and step back from activism, to use your energy carefully, to choose your battles, because this is very difficult, because the powers that may be the powers that attack you, the government attack you with a package, right? I mean, so they're attacking you with respect to women's rights, LGBT rights, workers' rights, environmental issues, health, secularism. So from time to time, you have to choose your battles and specialize to some extent, but we can't. And this is very exhausting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so connecting with other academics, I mean, unlikely others, right? That's sort of like unlikely solidarities being formed in these through these experiences. Thank you very much. So, Mike, do you want to go on?
Yeah, I just realized, I'm in a group of academics and I'm the youngest. So again, an opportunity for me to position myself insofar as I'm a millennial. And I was just coming to the consciousness of having been brought up in the times of the neoliberalization of university or also of education at large. The massive times of being the creator of one's own success, of careerism, and at the same time the insecurization, I don't know how to say that other, of the structure itself. So the belief in the university for me was already something that was still a big stake to run after, but at the same time there was not at all a feeling of that could be a given or something, but the concurrence and the stress that these institutions oozed was already much more heightened than before. For instance, in Europe, the Bologna reform, as we at some point had diplomas that didn't have a finish line, but these were old times, and I didn't have the privilege to to live through this, but rather already in these very stressful environments. And so for me, at a certain point, and I think the rise of these new kinds of authoritarianism actually were a certain moment for me to realize that this course actually is over, or would I pursue it, being on my own all the time, only pursuing individual goals in this kind of sense, would actually be a huge trap, or that could be really a risk, or it could make me vulnerable to a point that I was then, or that I'm now beginning to realize, or getting a consciousness about that. That really leads to real danger. So for me, again, a positive point, I'm feeling that a certain melting of ego, or of only be my own reason to do things, actually felt for me liberating to also continue critiquing institutions that I'm working with, be it the university, but be it also the cultural sector in Germany or internationally. Because I was already suspicious about it. I loved the image of the fungi that wasn't yet really visible, but now is really very much blooming. But I surely had an inkling that, well, that can be, these are not our friends. These spaces are not there to hold us, actually. So yeah, these recent times actually helped me to realize that one should be really wise in choosing goals. And that my goal surely is not to, contribute to the persistence of these structures per se. And another point, which also for me is a bit pointing to this decentralizing or self-provincializing maybe, or decentralizing one's own story, is a phrase that is actually circulated, I think, very widely, but also amongst queer community, where they say they tried to bury us, but didn't know that we were seeds. I see this phrase. It's poetic. It's beautiful. I just realized it's written by a Greek poet. And what I really like about this phrase is also that it points to, you're not only here now, but there is a before and there will be an after. And that points to just keep on doing what you're doing, because you can count on that you're, transmitting things that people before you have already fought for, And you can hope that probably there will be some blooming at some point later. So in my perspective, this means the queer community, by definition, had a lot of times where we couldn't be as out as recently. And there were threats, and there were, like, I don't have to retell you this whole story, but the consciousness of being related to all these struggles and to all these bodies kind of also gave me another sense of like horizontality or interconnectedness, that this neoliberal ideation of you're your own subject and the only story that matters, like whooshed away a bit, and I'm actually glad about that.
It's very important, Mike. Thank you. I'm hearing from you that you were sort of against the structures that were in place in society, but not in order to espouse a new form of egotism or individualism, but instead you're talking about how that decentering of the ego can help connect people horizontally, and that's very valuable. And that's perhaps how you find the courage to ask to change. So thank you for that contribution. Joe, would you like to stick?
Thanks. Yeah, as an elder millennial, I'm sort of envying Mike's lead time of about 6 years on understanding the nature of neoliberalism in the academy. But I will start with something I'm not good at doing, which is, one of the things authoritarian politics does is it causes you to lose faith in things that you should still have faith in, right? Like it convinces people that democratic politics is not viable, for example. And I have been completely incapacitated by my loss of faith in the university. Again, not because I truly believed in it as a good thing, but because I believe in the creation of knowledge. I believe in teaching. I believe in liberal arts. I believe in places of free inquiry. And I have really been unable to effectively separate, like remain committed to those while also feeling like I was completely naive to ever believe in Columbia University or American higher education, and I have simply not been able to protect myself against that. And so day to day, I find myself very unmoored and disoriented about like, well, what do I do? What do I believe in? Like professionally, what am I working towards? But one thing I think I have done a better job of is uh, protecting myself kind of like socially and cognitively. And much of what everyone else has said resonates. I mean, as Volkan was saying, one of the things I found through the organizing that came out of the state of emergency was I learned who my real friends were, and I learned who my real allies and community were. And I learned the importance of having community, real community of like people who really share your values and who you can trust and have a trusted and safe conversation with. And, those came out of organizing. And I was really lucky to hear a lecture early on in my recent career as a faculty activist or whatever, by an American organizer called Myriam Kamara, in which she said that one of the goals of organizing is that there are other people to stand up when you need to sit down, and so that has also taught me the importance of maintaining community in which we can share responsibility. A certain amount of the crisis organizing I fell into was I'm the only one. November 2023, there were only a handful of tenured Jewish professors who would stand up and say this is an outrageous attack on, decency in the university to accuse these protesters of anti-Semitism. There were only a few of us who could do it. And it became my job to do it for a long time. And I have learned in the last year the importance of moving myself into spaces and configurations where I am not the only one who can do the things that need to be done. Or indeed of as Volkan was saying, of just stepping back entirely, of and this is where I come to a kind of approach to sort of cognitive and mental hygiene that where Rahul's words really resonated with me. And this comes down to, I think, one of the effects that authoritarianism, I'm finding, has on your sense of your individual agency and power. You know, like in the United States, we all grew up thinking that we have the power to like affect the direction of the country, and we have these rights and the obligation to exercise them and so forth. And coming to accept that that like the trajectory of the rocket was set long ago, right? And that what one may not have agency over where the rocket lands. One may have agency over getting people out of the way of the rocket, you know? I mean, this is a slightly like rough metaphor to use, but coming to a better sense of like what one has to think about oneself as being immediately responsible for, and also what one has a responsibility to like stay aware of, right? So earlier you spoke about like turning off the news. It has been so important to me to really manage my diet of media and social media. And this is very hard to do because one of the things you find, right, is that bad things are happening and you know the mainstream media is not telling you about them. And so you think, well, I have identified my like social media or alternative media sources that will tell me what's going on, and therefore I have to stay glued to them. But no, you don't. And so one of the things that I have been working on is you know, perhaps the most important thing I think that I can protect and maintain is my like intellectual and emotional space of myself as an individual. That is the thing that authoritarianism really wants. It really wants to just get inside your head and live there and keep you from living there on your own terms, you know? And so in that, you know, I do find my scholarship to be a refuge and my work to be a refuge. And you know, simply sitting down and reading a book, I have come to understand. I mean, I grew up reading Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451. I always thought it was a little corny. No, he's absolutely right. It's like super important to sit down and read a book that you want to read. So.
So important. Thank you. So organizing, but also realizing how far, I mean, the limits of our own agency, wonderful, and how we can actually keep some energy within us to be resilient. I don't like that word, but, you know, to keep on going. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you all. So with that, let's go on to the third question. What have you learned that you think would be helpful to share or connect your struggle with others in similar situations? In which sense, now we start, you know, thinking perhaps collectively, but one of the organizers, Daniel, who's also here somewhere in the background, put this question in this way. I think I like this way of putting this question. What wisdom would you like to share with your younger self? Or with someone only recently beginning to live under authoritarian conditions? So let's start with you, Rahul.
I think one of my learnings has been late in life has been that you know, as Volkan put it, you have to pick your battles. When you're young, everything is important, and it is. But you can be hyper vigilant without wanting to get involved in absolutely everything, because this is not a battle that will take a year or a decade or 2 decades to fix. This is a real marathon, and pacing yourself and reminding yourself that you are one person and you cannot do it all alone will free you to actually pay attention to what's important to you. I would also sort of tell myself that many of the people who had funny ideas, ridiculous ideas that you laughed at because they were so beyond the pale, these people in the intervening years actually became really dangerous. And one thing I've learned is don't laugh at people anymore. If there's somebody who sounds dangerous, they probably will be dangerous at some point. So take ideas very, very seriously. I think there's really no such thing as a ridiculous idea anymore. And the third one actually is protect yourself in other ways, because if your goal is to speak the truth and to uncover the truth and to advocate for people who are vulnerable to the excesses of power, you need to find a way to keep going. And this, I think, might be less of a problem in the Western world, but I think money, finances, these are real issues. These are issues because if you are protected and if you create that buffer for yourself, you're able to think critically, you're able to sort of keep that line of inquiry going. If you don't have money, you're really working towards surviving and you have no time. And essentially, you are at the mercy of people who know that you're not going to step out of line because you're reliant on a job or other such things. You're vulnerable. So I think these things about essentially protecting yourself, about being hyper vigilant, these are things that I would really tell myself 10, 20 years ago.
Thank you so much. So money and finances are really important and are a setback, like as Volkan was saying. I mean, many of the academics in Turkey had to scatter around the world because they were jobless, and I'm sure you also face that situation where they hold the resources, but we connecting can build power from below. So. Yeah, thank you for that. Volkan, do you want to continue?
Well, I'm going to say similar things with Rahul, as Rahul said. So again, don't run around everywhere. Choose your battles as carefully as possible. One thing that I have learned through the years, we kind of knew it because we live in Turkey, but we learned really better. Don't trust your institutions, including the legal system, right? Don't ever think this could never happen. Everything can happen, right? Remember that we are in a permanent emergency situation where those in power change the rules of the game according to their interests, according to their whims. And even privileged institutions are not immune to these attacks. American academics has learned about this bitterly, right? The Columbia University. How could you expect Columbia University to react in this way? So don't trust any kind of privilege, and because the authoritarians attack also on the privileged, so that they can show that they are even stronger than those who have had privilege before, like the Osman Kavala case in Turkey. He's been an important businessman who has supported civil society initiatives in Turkey and is being held in prison for 8 years now. Right, so they attacked privilege. So we can't trust on privilege as well. One thing that I want to also formulate carefully is this. Institutionalized politics, organized politics is also, as I said, is important. And from time to time, we tend to criticize the oppositional forces very unconstructively, and that's not helping. From time to time, I learned within this 10 years that, for example, the Kurdish party that I have supported, or the CP, the Social Democratic Party that I now support with their aim or with their vision of opposition, they are, due to the existing power of their organizations, they know how to do certain things better than our subjective point of views from time to time. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't criticize institutions, but whenever we criticize institutions, we have to be somewhat constructive, I think. Otherwise it doesn't help. One more thing, and that's it. I've recently learned from Anna Segers when you're in a difficult situation, you need to find 3 or 5 friends who can offer you sanctuary. And that's very important. And that's not about friendship. I mean, it's not about going to your best friend. Your best friend may not offer you this, right? So there are many other considerations that you have to think about by choosing these 4 or 5 trustworthy persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Volkan. Political friendships, maybe. Hannah Arendt would approve. Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, directly adding to what you said, Volkan, I would suggest to my younger self that it's actually worth to also consider at what point you yourself can be a sanctuary for others, or you yourself are probably a resource to much more people or contexts than you would think. And again, neoliberalism taught at least me that I'm mostly, not full, but rather lacking, always lacking something. And this perspective turns it around, because I find myself more and more actually growing into the understanding of how much I'm actually also able to give, to share, to point to, because you always find a couch. If you just search long enough in your head, you would always find that couch that you can, pass somebody onto, or whatever else it is. So yeah, just like stepping off this idea of you're not enough, you're actually basically plenty. And that's what you're supposed to be, and also supposed to, to share and to pass on. And the other thing that I think I would love to tell my younger self is actually, don't be afraid, even though there are many reasons to be afraid. But don't let fear reign over you, as fear is probably, of course, it's a human instinct. It's normal to feel this feeling, but the amount of fear and the shapes of fear that we are circulating as societies, they are not normal, and they are not, they're foreign to your body, and they're not. You kind of need to distinguish, like the produced and imposed fear, and the fear that is probably okay or normal to feel, because otherwise it will prohibit your life, basically. And I'm very strongly referring also to what you said, Joe, to this idea of hygiene, or idea of creating and keeping a space within oneself that is basically a sanctuary, or something that this fear cannot touch, or that where this fear is just not invited to. And even if that sounds a bit bold or courageous, or maybe even naive, I think it's just very important. And I see it in people. I see where, if people have this kind of practice with themselves, or if they just abandoned this inner space of peace. And I think it's necessary. And yeah, and nobody teaches you, basically, not school. And yeah, so you need to find your way to it.
Thank you very much. I love the way you moved sanctuary from being what we go to what we offer, and then also this inner sanctuary you were proposing. I love that shift. So Joe, would you like to follow up?
Thanks. I mean, Mike's comments have actually made me think about different lines than I was originally going to speak on, which is, so I guess following on from that, but sort of thinking as I go. I mean, I think I would want to convey to my younger self, or someone in a comparable position, that you are capable of much, much more than your fear, your own fear. Your strength is much greater than your fear's real power over you. And your strength is also like, who really knows how strong you are is the people who would like you to be afraid. That is one reason that they would like you to be afraid. They actually have an accurate assessment of what you're capable of. I think I would want to give the advice, not just as Volkan said, don't trust your institutions. Don't trust that, like, you can't trust that anyone who you might assume would do the right thing or step in to avert a crisis. You can't, and no, I'm not saying you can't trust anyone, but rather individuals as well as institutions, and individuals in specific positions of power will fail you. I mean, one of the um, most kind of grinding things for my like micro generational experience of all this has been that I have a distinct memory of being 18 after 17 or 18 after 9/11, and you know, having grown up with a very naive sense that basically the Democratic Party in this country were the good guys, and then watching the George W. Bush administration go all in on Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism and jingoism, and watching every elected Democrat fall right in line behind them. And I had a premonition of what is happening now, basically, and it is a horrible feeling. It's a horrible feeling to have that kind of premonition fulfilled. But this has been my experience of, you know, of Colombia the last 2 years. The specific individuals who you think are maybe going to avert it, just don't assume that they will. But the corollary to that is that you do have friends, friends you haven't met yet, and the friends who you haven't met yet are the ones who share your real values. You know, you will find them if you can step out of the fear and into the strength and into the kind of like acknowledgement and embrace of your values, then you will find the people who are your friends. The other thing I would want to say is, as you approach the question of like organizing or finding community or building the social configurations that will give you agency, it will look like there are a lot of people who don't seem to see that anything is wrong. And that is surely the case. I mean, Rahul spoke about this earlier, right? Yes. But it is also the case that there is a difference when you're looking at other people. There is a difference between people not also seeing that there is a problem, and people not seeing themselves as having any agency over it. And the people who also, there are people who also will see that there is something wrong, but they will not think there is anything they can do about it. And it is, I mean, that has been where I have found the most productive kind of organizing work, is finding the people who don't need to be lifted completely to seeing that something is wrong, but the people who see something is wrong and they just don't know what they should do. And that's actually a much smaller lift in a lot of ways. So, you know, it will be hopeless and demoralizing to feel like you and your 12 friends or whatever are the only ones who see that something is wrong. And it's important to, you know, always be on guard against that kind of demoralizing effect that authoritarianism wants to give you. But to have a kind of have the ability to look at the people around you with a kind of generosity of spirit. I mean, very practical points have also been made that I would just second, like having mental and physical health practices that give you a kind of stable foundation when things become destabilizing is very important. Taking seriously, you know, things like financial stability, and just like there are things that you won't want to have to worry about when you are worrying about the collapse of your government or whatever. And it's actually, you will think when you are in crisis mode that there are other things are more important than those things. But actually, you know, I mean, there is this saying in American parenting these days, like you can't put someone else, you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you put someone else's oxygen mask on. But this is in fact true.
Maybe your son also wants to say something. We would like, you know, he's so young, we would like to have a world in which he can live in, relating to others safely and with trust. But hope that comes about. But it's not going to be easy. Thank you, all of you, for these thoughts. I have taken so many notes. There are lots of threads being formed. I was going to ask you if you want to comment on each other's experience. Just take, 5 minutes, something you want to ask each other before we turn to the audience.
Yeah, so I was, a couple of you mentioned something about not trusting institutions. And we've spoken about institutions in the context of universities. But I'd just like to understand, from you, and especially given everything that happened since October 2023, do you feel like there's generally been a sort of weakening of institutions, or rather betrayal by institutions which are not necessarily universities? I'm talking about the media as well. I'm talking about other places that you would have trusted. And I'd like to ask, I mean, if you do think that that has happened, why that has actually happened?
Yeah, I think that I mean the way I've perceived and experienced it in the context of the United States has been basically that we have observed a very powerful class solidarity. I mean that the authoritarian push in the United States has been very effective at offering the ruling class things that it wants in exchange for their notional responsibilities in other settings. And so I think what we've actually just seen is a kind of epiphanic clarification of who really makes the decisions in certain kinds of cultural institutions, and what their real priorities are, kind of when the rubber meets the road. I guess that's how I've been sort of trying to make sense of it.
I also was kind of just quickly reflecting, where does that come from my perspective? I am involved, or like happily committed with people from diverse backgrounds in organizations of critiquing the structures at theaters, for instance, but also universities. And I learned a lot from struggles of post-migrant positioned people, and also a lot of queer crip people who were sharing with me very generously their knowledge, or we were kind of interlinking what we were all experiencing and observing. And so the deceit, I think, in institutions is like nothing new. It's rather a very continuous, long way or also road of activism that basically always showed, you need to push a lot for then a tiny bit gets through maybe, and certain measures are applied to change the institution, to open it to basically more bodies and the needs of more bodies. But that also comes always with the costs, with the cost of tokenization, with the cost of splitting and the desolidarization processes. And in the end, for the moment that we are living now, when, for instance, the US is abolishing all these DEI measures, I can paraphrase what Paul Preciado was saying about that. He was saying now we are all sitting here and need to talk about that these measures are gone. We never wanted them in the first place. That was never what we were aiming for, having these kinds of, bits of cakes and candy handed over that were always coming with the cost. But we wanted to have a profound change in these institutions, and that never happened. So basically, it's sitting there a bit with this thing of, it's shit what's happening right now. The defunding of all these structures is basically the defunding of a lot of people, and a lot of lives are changed right now as we speak, and not for the better. But basically, that was never the demand, that was not the wish towards these institutions. And so, probably from my side, it comes from a already longer grief, or longer grudge that's related with these institutions. And I'm not, I'm white, but I'm not in a position of power as a professorship, never been, and I don't know, never will be. I don't want to jinx anything, but it's just becoming very not so probable, probably, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing about trusting and not trusting institutions. And I had really in mind not the university, but rather the legal system that we have been, I mean, we have lost in the last 20 years. And it was a matter of conscious politics, right? So with Mike's intervention, I would say, okay, we need to trust, we need to build trust in us institutions, which are good institutions, right? You want to have good institutions. But what I'm trying to say is the liberal basis of the order of the existing societies, which is based on the rule of law, that has not been I mean, that has collapsed very easily, right? With Trump coming to power in the United States and with Erdogan in Turkey, so it has imploded. We don't have. I'm very. It's very difficult to say today now to claim that we have international law as a soft institution. I mean, it was always a soft institution that was in existence. Now it's very difficult to say that it really exists, right? I mean, because when those who have the power wants to bomb some boats, well, they bomb it. That's it.
You know, this point, sort of, Mike, that you made about pushing really hard and then something small comes through. It really sort of resonated with me because we've been using that word a lot, actually, resonated today. But it resonated with me particularly because it put me in mind of something else. We've been talking about institutions and uh, really pushing through for them to sort of register some things. And, you know, my own experience has been for a long time when I was pitching stories to Western publications, you know, the big ones, the ones that the prestige publications that do long form work and all of that stuff. Um, I had a very, very hard time convincing people why something was important. And the reason I mention it over here is because I feel like in our really connected world right now, especially with the large tech firms and the way they behave in other parts of the world, if I feel like if people had been paying more attention to what was, say, happening in, you know, with the Rohingyas, for example, or how Facebook was being used to perpetuate crimes, or how it was being misused for elections in a certain part of the world. It's it's like an early warning system, just kind of paying attention. And somewhere I think I've often thought, especially since October 23, that America's early warning systems actually failed. And it comes down to this idea of, I guess, class solidarity within these institutions that were looking at the rest of the world as, you know, they were exoticizing it. They were, these are unusual places where unusual things happen. Uh, they were not seeing these places as real places with real stories, with real people. Um, and yeah, I think that's one of the things I've thought about a lot when it comes to authoritarianism, which is that it's happened in other parts of the world, but because it's been exoticized so much and seen as regional conflicts and, you know, the local strongman doing a strange thing, um, people sort of, it does, the danger of it all doesn't register. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I'm sorry. That's it.
Thank you so much, Rahul. It reminded me of since 2016, I've been telling my US friends and European friends also not to feel sorry for us, because I was saying, we are your future. And unfortunately, that happened, right? But okay, so you go ahead, and then we have a couple of questions from the audience. If you don't mind, we can take them on and continue our conversation, keeping them in mind as well. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I just wanted to briefly follow up on what Raul was saying and what you were saying. You know, and this comes back to a point I was trying to make earlier. like this thing I was saying about maintaining your kind of intellectual and cognitive independence under authoritarianism. That is no different from what Toni Morrison said decades ago about the function of American racism being distraction. And like the authoritarianism in America was already daily life for Black Americans, basically since their ancestors were brought to this country in one form or another. And so it is not just that Americans, in our kind of chauvinism about the rest of the world, thought like, well, that happens to brown people in other countries, but it doesn't happen to us. It was also that Americans failed to understand that our neighbors had already, that we had already been doing it to our neighbors for a long time, right? And so there is a kind of I mean, look, the one of the things most fortunate for me when I moved into organizing and activism is that the people I was immediately finding myself in contact with, they all had been dealing with this stuff for longer and had the patience and grace to like introduce me to it and like put up with me as I got caught up with it. The moment I became active about Palestine on campus, a colleague who had been dealing with Hindutva harassment for years showed me how to like lock down my online presence and protect myself because he knew the tactics that would be brought to bear, that I was able to start quickly organizing with other Jewish colleagues who are Jews of color and could also tell me, look, here's the Black experience of this. Here's what this looks like, and here's what we already understand. So, I mean, that it's one of I'm grateful to be in a space like this because one of the things I have learned is that there's always people who've been dealing with this for longer than you, and you can always learn from them.
Precious, thank you. Myriam, do you want to sort of read out the questions or summarize them so that we continue addressing them and having our own conversation as well?
Yes, thank you
Thank
for
you.
the wonderful conversation. Everyone in the Q&A is very appreciative. So there's one question about the delayed response of protests and movements and whether this delayed dynamic is inevitable. And then there's a second question relating to friendships. You've already mentioned that. And the question is, how do you manage to maintain friendships in authoritarian times? And maybe if that's not too much, if you could connect this also to questions on mental health in your community. How do you take care of each other? That was another question.
I am daring myself lately to pick up friendships that my, I don't know, social cohort wouldn't have brought to me initially. Like I realized at some point I'm very much amongst equally aged people, la-di-da. So realizing the whole bubble thing, of course, the queer community gets criticized a lot for being a bubble, which in the end actually sometimes is just something to protect yourself. So I'm not against bubbles. But this question of not letting take over fear, for me, what I found as a remedy is to create connections to people that, in my case, are older than me, also living in the eastern part of Germany, and that if I just meet them in the tram, I would probably think that they would have very right-wing views, because this is already the state of the art to what it came to in these places. You always assume that okay, the votings are so high for the right wing, there must be only right wingers around me, and that's not the case. That's really not the case. But of course, different generations have different takes on stuff and different experiences, and it's so valuable to learn from each other and also to really be mad at each other. And like having these conversations that are actually icky. And at the same time, also realizing friendships are not only about political views and not only about what you like on Facebook, Insta, or whatever, or not. Actually, friendship is also about sharing time, resources, energy, love, care mostly. And I actually also can train myself to accept care from people that I'm not 100% in accordance with politically. And also vice versa. Like for me, it's very important because I otherwise would find myself in a very small circle all of a sudden. So yeah, trying to trying to really focus on the needs that we share, rather than on the only aspect that might make the conversation a bit uncomfortable. And I'm not talking about befriending extremists, right? I'm just talking about befriending or staying in contact with people where for some points the discussion will get a bit icky, But because I'm observing a lot that these connections are vanishing or getting more difficult, and I think that's a problem. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Also precious. Yeah, I like the icky part. Yeah, Jill.
Well, it just makes me think about how some of the like closest and most important new friendships I've developed in the last couple of years have been with people much older than me, and that is, as Mike is saying, that is like it is very important to opening yourself up to different ways of thinking about like, well, who are my friends and who is my community is very important. There was one question in the Q&A bucket here about like, what do you do with the friends who are just like not reading the news at all and preferring to be in kind of total ignorance or denial, or prioritizing personal peace above all. And I guess something I think about is that like there are ways of shutting yourself off from what's happening in the world or in your society that are not making you any happier. There are ways of setting up your media consumption that are really about like preventing you from paying attention to what you're feeling about what you know is going on, right? And so relationships and friendships, I think actually part of what is most important and what people need most is to be able to talk openly, not just about what is happening and whether it's good or bad, but like how does it make you feel? Because everything about our media ecosystem and our technology ecosystem is designed to basically numb you to your own emotional reactions to what's going on, or to lock you into channels where you only have a certain set of emotional reactions to a certain kind of information. I think also I really want to just stress that I've spoken about like the rich friendships I've developed out of organizing, but like not every friendship has to be an organizing relationship. And in fact, if your only friendships are organizing relationships, that can become very toxic and draining on you. And so and again, like this might sound corny, but like the ability to have authentic, trusting friendships and relationships in a climate of authoritarianism is very important and is one of these like foundational things that will let you do other things if you have it.
Yeah, the one about kids is actually really close to my heart because we have two children. They're both teenagers, one in her late teens and the other in her early teens. And they grew up hearing a lot of conversations at home about the state of the world, the state of the country, and they just they just sucked it all up. And at some point, we had to really stop talking. We had to stop talking about things because we wanted them to sort of decide for themselves and see the world and make up their own minds for themselves. We had to show them, in fact, that there was really more to life than politics and these things, and we had to show them that they had to find joy their own way, which means go out, play with your friends, make your become arch enemies with somebody, or do your own thing, and really don't take on the concerns of your parents. At the same time, we also had to help them navigate things like school, where authoritarian ideas, they sort of one of the things that they really do is they get deeply involved in what children are learning and how they react and what they can learn in school and what they can discuss in school. And so we've had to find that balance where we tell them that, look, a certain thing is important, but you also have to remember your relationships with your people, with your teachers, and save your battles for later. So I think that's how we've done it. A lot of parents that we know of, they haven't done these things. It's just avoid it at all costs. Don't engage with it. So that is again another facet of sort of life in under such conditions.
Lovely. Would you like to, I'm looking at you, Mike, address the question of creativity? Because that's something you might like to answer. It is difficult when we're talking about dimming our senses, but then how does creativity happen?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think it's not only for artists, but for everyone. It's a very important practice because creativity, like if you really allow yourself to be in that state, it's actually chaos, and it is anti-authoritarianism also. Like, of course, there are authoritarian art practices, like especially in Germany, we of course have a long tradition of, Nazi tending stuff of that, but that's for me not creativity, because creativity is the state where you actually allow things to occur that you don't control. And that's hard to get sometimes, but it is the only source of, life and energy also that at least I know of, apart from friendships. So this is really a practice to harness or to care for and to nourish. And I, for myself, coming from, a rather neoliberal tending art school, I found myself actually having a more easy time to get creative, because I realized that actually monetizing my creativity or monetizing my art practice is actually dimming it. So I tend to search for, and actually I'm following their a saying that my mentor Liz Rosenfeld was giving to me: you need to do art practices that are not for sale. You need to do them for yourself. You need to, of course, if you paint stuff or perform stuff, at some point you can show it to an audience, but that shouldn't be the only thing that you're doing in terms of your creativity, because it will not, like, you compromise your inner well at the very source already. So yeah, basically carve out time where you do random stuff with yourself, and also allow yourself to call that creativity, because the arts, of course, managed also our imagination of what creativity actually looks like or is, but it actually is so much more. It's basically where you can feel yourself, not controlling yourself so much, at least, to say it with the Foucault thinking. Yeah. And also maybe because there was another question, and I think that's very connected. Somebody asked about the earlier movements and what we were learning from them. And I can just share, because I was mentioning the past, that I was doing a lot of research into the performing arts avant-gardes of the GDR, so the socialist state part of Germany, because I was so interested in, was there actually an avant-garde? Because in the Western books, nobody talks about it, or there was long a certain kind of oblivion towards it. And what I found was amazing, because there were collectives, there were, like, feminist queer groups who were mostly doing things that were not considered as art at the time. They were dressing up, they were doing drag, they were doing performance, they were doing just, knitting circles, and they were also masturbating on rooftops. And I was so happy to realize that this was my heritage and that I can connect to that. And of course, they were misbehaving in a society that was completely controlling and dimming all the lights, So yeah, go whatever gives you pleasure, and just don't stop doing it.
Laughing at the authority actually sort of diminishes the authority, right? That's also something. Yes, thank you, Joe.
I mean, my kids are younger than Rose, but I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that I am mindful of many of the same considerations Raoul talked about. They are not so urgent yet, given my kids' ages, but I think it is also the case that many of the capacities that I sort of struggle to have or maintain or develop in myself, my children and my friends' children naturally have. Like creativity is one of these things that like children naturally have, and it is a to simply engage with children in ways that like recognize and encourage these basic capacities of like asking questions, being creative, expressing yourself. I mean, those are that in some ways that's our like strategic reserve of these capacities. I have not known how to talk to my children about um the possibility that like they might themselves specifically be targets for certain kinds of harassment. And I don't know how to have that conversation because that's not a conversation that my parents ever had with me as like a white American. We don't get that talk. Our friends get that talk, but we don't get that talk. But in particular, there have been points in the last 2 years where I personally have been targeted for like harassment and attack, and it seemed to me there was a very real likelihood that might somehow bleed over into my daughter's experience at her elementary school. And I did not know how to prepare her for that. And I opted to not talk to her about it unless it became an issue. And now, we're living outside of the country and we're supposed to come back at a certain point. And I know that the lists that our students have been on that have gotten them detained, I'm on those lists too, and I'm a citizen. And I will have to think about what is the conversation I have with with my children when we move back before we go through passport control about what might happen. I mean, I will also have to conversation with my wife about, is this a safe time for us to be going through the US border? And there was a question about this, and I just want to acknowledge that, like, I don't know what to say. I don't know, there is a certain amount of our conversation has been, I think, predicated on certain kinds of basic security, certain kinds of basic privilege to think first, or at least think first in this venue, about things like agency, right? And there are also crucial considerations that many people have about safety and survival. I mean, I have, look, my grandfather's family fled Germany in 1938, and their experience shapes much of my thinking about this. My paternal grandfather, I have read his FBI file. He's being investigated for having communist associations in, McCarthy's U.S. I think about that a lot too. Uh, I think, an extension of what I was saying before about understanding that there's people who know more than you about how to get through this is like one of the things that I, as a white American, have had to come to understand is that to stop thinking about freedom as a thing that I have lost because other people already didn't have it in my society, and therefore I may not have truly had it to begin with. And to stop thinking about a freedom so much as a thing that I have lost, as a dream and a project that other people have already been working on for a long time, and that I am joining in that project. And I do not want to inculcate in my children my sense of loss that is predicated in part on my own generational experience and naivete. I want to introduce them, to whatever extent seems viable and possible, into that great project going forward.
Thank you. There's actually a very important question that came up about kids who are growing with harassment, discrimination, those kids that cannot be protected. And it starts out as a question to Rahul, I guess, because mentioned are kids of Indian Muslims under Modi, but it can be expanded to ask about persecuted minorities and children who are not protected and cannot be protected by their parents. So I don't know if you have anything to say about this very difficult question. Then we have one about guilt, how we are made to feel guilty because in the everyday, because so many people are in prison, awaiting trial, etc. So how do we deal with this permanent guilt? I think we address this and saying we do need to, create safe havens for ourselves as well. Those inner sanctuaries. If not, we cannot continue. Do you want to perhaps wrap up with how we can overcome guilt and, I guess, try to address the question of those who, how to relate to those who cannot be protected in any way, children or others?
I'll make mine really quick. I take a lot of hope from America, actually, because I know people are really down on America, but I look around and I see a society that really is standing up for their neighbors, for all the stuff that we're seeing on the news. There are people out on the streets, they're protesting, they are, they're in the way of, people being harassed and arrested, and they're really putting their bodies on the line in some way. And I do appreciate that. It's not something that I've seen very much, here. I think this thing about how do you protect the kids of minorities, I don't know how to answer that question. I spent 7 years talking to people, speaking to Muslims, and trying to understand what their lived experience was like in India. And it seemed to me every time I spoke to them, they would, a lot of them would talk about the Constitution. And to me, that really said that institutions were not there for them. The police were not there for them. The judiciary was not there for them. And so ultimately, they relied on they had this implicit faith that the Constitution at the end of the day would stand behind them and would protect them. I don't know where that will go. But this other point about the fascist takeover of institutions and about how fascism works best by not taking over institutions in one go, I think it's more nuanced than that. I think over a period of time, it just takes people who are conservative in nature to enter institutions at various levels, at various times, and you see this corrosion of institutions. And it may not seem apparent like this moment, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, you'll start seeing a series of judgments that don't make sense, that don't adhere to the Constitution or any rational law book. So I think just being in that state of watchfulness really helps. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone want to add something, or any leftover thoughts?
I had just I just reread also the questions in the Q&A, and I had just one thought for this other question about how to actually relate to friends that went into shutdown or into disconnect from political processes. And I can only share that you can only do so much, actually, but living a life that is the most true to what you want to see in the world is usually, in my experience, inspiring, especially the closest to you, because they necessarily react to that energy. And furthermore, because I have a very particular issue to me. I'm coming from a small city where my whole generation left because it's just there are no economic opportunities and there's a lot of right-wing pressure. But I'm finding myself reconnecting with this whole generation. Like I try actually to build connections to people that have the same experience as me. And I try to involve them in my projects. And so over the course of time, I already, I turned some very true, honest disbelievers who had a lot of reason to be very much against this, space because they lived horrible experiences. But I kind of, through working together, collaborating on stuff and talking about it, and also just like, being honest about my care and my ambivalent feelings about all of this, I realized that I kind of unlocked a bit, or, made stuff a bit more, all this blockage became a bit more movement in them, is my perception. Of course, I cannot speak for them, but I'm realizing that it's actually only through connection that modes of freeze, of shutting down, of all these psychological states of disconnection will eventually become softer or turn into something that then reveals the need that is below that, the need for security, for attachment, for being in contact with each other. So I think that people are not in shutdown by choice and for lifetime. So, and you shouldn't address them like that. You should address them like people who also have needs, and expressing them by freezing, which is valid, but probably not so sustainable. Yeah, that's how I see that.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. An optimistic note. For Volkan, I thought you had something to say. Yes.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if I'm going to be able to end my train of thought here, but just one thing about guilt is it's always seemed to me problematic. I mean, we have to have some kind of responsibility, and of course, we feel guilty. I mean, I talked about the 10th of October massacre in Turkey, and you feel guilty because these people have died for you, right? I mean, you could have been there, and they have just died. But I don't know if it's the it's the right way to pack this in politics in terms of guilt. I mean, we have to talk about responsibility, of course. But I mean, with respect to Turkish history, we have the genocide, Armenian genocide. Coming to terms with the past is an important, must be an important part of our responsibility. And if that responsibility does not occur, then it's easier to dismantle the existing institutions. That's clear, right? But that we feel individually guilty, I don't know. I mean, I have problems with that kind of notion, but I mean, it's open.
I can't talk anyone out of feeling guilty in the situations that have been discussed. But I mean, so if the question that came up was like, what do you do with those feelings? I mean, a question you can ask those feelings is like, okay, well, what does it help me to feel guilty? Like, what does the feeling of guilt enable me to do things, or does it make me more powerless? And there, I think that one of the things that's actually tangled up with some of these kinds of guilt we feel, or might feel, is an assessment, an honest and realistic assessment of our agency, right? It's sometimes predicated on some idea that I could have done something or I should have done something. And that is an opportunity to ask, well, what can I do? Right? I mean, what can I do? What can someone in my position do?
Wonderful. Thank you all. We've been keeping you, in this conversation for 2 hours now, but at least for me, and I hope for the audience and for you as well, it was a very fruitful, very honest, and sort of, conversation that is, I believe, part of how we strengthen ourselves and motivate ourselves. So with this, I thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us, accepting our invitation, and do hope we continue connecting with each other.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.